Do you think that maybe all of this anti-hustle content has gone a little too far? Well, in some ways, I think it has. And so that's exactly what we're going to be unpacking in today's episode of the Heart-Centered Business Podcast. This is episode number 491, which means you can find all the relevant links and the show notes for today's episode over at tashcorbin.com/491. And because it's day 6 of Tashmas, you're going to want to go and check that one out because, as always, I've got a little gift for you at the end of today's episode. Let's break down this anti-hustle movement and where it might have gone a little too far, shall we? Hello, I'm Tash Corbin, a business strategist and mentor based on the Sunshine Coast in Australia. The mission of this podcast is to help heart-centered entrepreneurs to make more money and in doing so, change the world for the better. This podcast was recorded on the lands of the Gubbi Gubbi and Jinnaburra people. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Given that in today's online marketing environment, where people are sharing a lot about behind the scenes of their business and their day-to-day lives, we can sometimes get caught up in comparing what we're doing with what other people are doing as business owners. And that comparison can also lead to consistently questioning whether you are working the right amount of hours. What is a realistic amount of hours to start, build, and sustain a business? Because if we're looking at people on Instagram and Facebook, there are people who, I don't know about you, but seeing their little agenda for what they've got on for the day, it makes me exhausted. And I in no way have any desire to model on the lifestyle that they lead, on the workload that they are diving in and completing every single day. But there are also creators who I think are intentionally making it look like they don't do anything at all, that their life is just a series of chilled out days, doing nothing and reaping the benefits with a multi-million-dollar a year income. And having met several multi-millionaire business owners through masterminds and through programs and also through having them at the Heart-Centered Business Conference, either as attendees or speakers, I can absolutely say that in a lot of cases, people are working far more behind the scenes than they ever let on. And part of that is a conscious decision to ensure that they are projecting a lifestyle of easy money and ease and simplicity. But also sometimes it's just unconscious because people aren't necessarily drawn to sharing the tough parts of their day, the less glamorous parts of their life. Instead, they're just sharing the highlights reel. And I think we always need to be mindful that when we're consuming that kind of content, we aren't getting the full picture. And I am really grateful for the anti-hustle kind of content and messaging that I get to consume online from creators. I think it's really powerful to be reminded on a consistent basis that there is not a direct link between how hard you work and how much money you make. If that were true, nurses would be paid a whole lot more money. School teachers would be paid a whole lot more money, right? And so it's important, I think, that we are mindful and conscious of the messaging that we're taking in and the programming and mindset stuff that can come up for us around working hard. But anti-hustle does not mean anti-effort. It doesn't mean that you don't do any work at all. And so what I also see is people going through this seesaw between hustle and just hope for the result and it will come in. And I'm going to give you some examples of this because chances are that you've probably felt one or two of these at least throughout your time as a business owner. So it might be, for example, if you see some anti-hustle content, to think to yourself, well, surely those people still stay up till 2 a.m. sometimes to get things done, right? And that's often something I get asked in particular. Like, you do have pre-launch hustle time though, right? You stay up till 2 a.m. writing the emails. And I'm like, no, I am in bed by 8 to 8:30 most nights. It's got even earlier now that I'm in perimenopause. And so, there's this belief of like, oh, even when I'm seeing someone who seems to have that very boundary time in their business, who doesn't have that kind of drive and, I need to be working all the time kind of mentality, they are switching it on occasion, right? And for me, that would never involve staying up until 2 a.m. Never. Not in the last 10 years of having my business have I stayed up even until midnight, other than partying with people at Heart Centre Business Conference. But it's really fascinating to me that I also receive comments such as, you make it seem like you don't ever work at all. And that's not true either. I mean, I did spend for the second half of 2021 and all of 2022, my average working hours in my business was under 8 hours a week. And for the first half of that, it was under 5 hours a week. So I have had times where I have been very, very restricted in terms of hours because of my health and well-being. I was recovering from a surgery, then I was very unwell. And so there definitely have been times when I've done very little, but that did cost me growth of my business. That did mean that I didn't do a big launch of the Takeoff program at all during that time. My sales of the Heart Centre Business Planner from 2021 into the 2022 year were at a record low. And that's because I didn't have my regular capacity in terms of hours in order to do some of the pieces that would have resulted in sales. My business income did shrink from 2021 to 2022, and it stagnated in 2023. And I want to acknowledge that that stagnation was still a multi-six-figure income, but it wasn't the $1 million year that I thought I was going to be going for in 2022. And I thought I was going to be going for in 2023 by any stretch. So you can see that seesaw from, well, surely you hustle sometimes, and then all the way to, well, is it that you don't do work at all? And then people will often also, because my business is established, they'll make assumptions about how hard I worked when I first started my business. Now, I did quit my job to start my business full time, and I was home on my own starting my business in full-time hours because Davey was going to a full-time job for the first 6 months. And I have previously spoken before about how for the first 6 to 8 weeks of my business, I was staying up till 9, 10 o'clock at night getting stuff done because I had this belief that that's what you had to do in order to build a business and start and get all of those important things done. But I've also shared previously on this podcast that 90% of what I did in the first 6 months was just wasted effort. And looking back now, I was just trying to fill the hours. I was trying to look like the kind of person who was starting a business. And so I was making up a bunch of things that were mission critical that absolutely were not. And the things that actually generated the early sales in my business, the early growth of my business, and having a 5-figure month in the 6th month of my business, they were actually 1 to 2 hours a day, 4 days a week kind of activities in terms of marketing, sales, lead generation, and follow-ups. And it only took me 2 to 3 months before I really had a wake-up call of this is why I started a business, was to not work these long hours, was to have the lifestyle that I wanted. and to have that real balance between work and life, have a lifestyle business. That's the type of business I was wanting to create. And so I wasn't even 3 months into my business before I made a change and didn't do work after David got home from his job. Plus, I gave myself a 1.5 hour lunch break every single day, and I watched a movie every day. I watched the midday movie on free-to-air TV each day, and it went for 90 minutes. So I would literally watch the midday movie, making my lunch, and then sit down and I might do some crochet. But I literally watched it every single day. I also think, importantly, at that time, I was actively doing Money Bootcamp with Denise Duffield-Thomas. I had done it before I started my business, and I redid it after I started my business as well. And so I realized very quickly that one of the things I needed to ensure I was getting really clear in my mindset was that I could make money easily, that I didn't have to work long hours and burn myself out in order to have the level of income that I wanted. And so it was really powerful for me in those early months of my business to really pay attention to what was popping up for me around mindset and my belief about working hard, my beliefs about what it took to be able to generate the kind of income that I wanted to generate. And so I was very diligent in paying attention to my mindset and those pop-up thoughts and making a proactive decision about what were the beliefs I wanted to hold on to and what beliefs were no longer serving me and I needed to let go of them. So in response to but you hustled for the first few years so that now you can have that really chill lifestyle. No, that's not the case at all. I really subscribed to the belief that you train your business what it can expect from you long term in the early growth phase of your business. And so I wanted to train my business that it got me for 25 to 30 hours a week. And that's really powerful to pay attention to what makes me feel like that's not available, what made me feel like that wouldn't work or that I would therefore have to resign myself to lower results than everyone else. But then, right, there's this belief that, well, there must be some kind of hustle. But then we swing all the way back to the other side, which was I can just create something once and it will just sell itself over and over and over again. And that has been that sort of passive income promise for quite a while online now. And I also don't think that that extreme is true either. Yes, you can create something once and sell it over and over again, but the belief that it will sell itself is where I think a lot of people go wrong. And also that belief can sometimes lead to a lot of disappointment for people who started their business because they wanted to serve and help and work with people. They wanted to make a difference to people's lives. They wanted to be in their zone of genius, doing the thing that they are most brilliant at most of the time. And then they get sold this passive income dream and they think, well, if I create something that's a passive income product, I can just focus on the creation, focus on being in my zone of genius, and then the sales and marketing part just happens to be magically taken care of. And then what they end up experiencing is they invested a couple of months, maybe, sometimes it's a couple of days or a couple of weeks, in being in their zone of genius, creating the thing. And now 90% of their days, 90% of their weeks is focused on marketing. And that's not why they started a business. They didn't start a business to become a marketer full time. They started a business because they wanted to work with clients or they wanted to be in their creation space. They wanted to be working with people and helping people and seeing the results of what it was that they were actually doing. And in getting all caught up in this create it once and it will sell itself thousands and thousands of times over, they've actually now built a business where more of their time is spent in marketing and sales than it is spent in delivery. And that does not light them up either. So then we swing the other way. And I've definitely heard this a lot as we come towards the end of the year. And I hear it a lot in January and February, every single year as well. I call it front loading, which is if I can just use these 2 to 3 weeks that I've got and really go hard, then I'm setting myself up for chilled out time down the track. And for a lot of people, that is not the reality that then unfolds. That is not what actually happens. And unfortunately, because that's not what happens, then they spend a lot of time beating themselves up over it. You know, have you ever done that to yourself where maybe you've got yourself a little 2 to 3 week window where you don't have any clients in that time, or you don't have the kids at home in that time, or you have the kids at home and you don't have to do the school runs and the lunch boxes and all of those sorts of things, the after school activities. Or maybe you've got that window because you're house sitting and you're in a different environment. And so you've got all of this time and you think, if I just jam that window of time full of productive, effective work, then I'll be able to take my foot off the accelerator and relax and see the fruits of my labor just come in over the following year without really having to put in a lot of effort. Now, I am definitely a fan of batching. I'm definitely a fan of going on a little retreat for a week and getting a bunch of stuff done. But I also know that if I gave myself a goal of working 10 hours a day, 5 days in a row, there is no way I would actually nail that. There is no way by the end of that week, I would actually be doing a good job on the last day. That is the road to brain fry. That is the road to burnout. That is the road to I've got so many hours free. I don't need to be pushing too hard. So why don't I just take the first morning to really plan it out and really take the time to connect in with the right energy and get myself organized. And, oh, you know what? I'll just declutter my photos. Oh, I'm just going to tidy up my downloads folder on my computer. Oh my gosh, it's 3 days later and I still haven't actually done anything that's of value. Has anyone done that to themselves before? I definitely know that I have. So for a lot of people, that's not a helpful belief about hustle versus anti-hustle either, because it's still living in the extremes. And it's often in those extremes where we see the biggest challenges and that frustration that can come for yourself. So, you know, that's the swing back into the hustle side of, oh, I'm just going to hustle for this amount of time, which rarely works out, let me just be clear. But then we go the other way. So then people have done the hustle for a month and they made amazing income. Then the following month, they're completely burnt out and they're not actually doing any marketing and sales activities, or they're not income generating. And so then they make that mean that what they need is recurring income. So if during that month, the sales that I made were of a membership where people didn't just buy from me once, they bought from me every single month without me having to market again, well, then I can just show up and run 2 to 3 calls a month and the money will just keep rolling in. But that's not true either. People who teach and sell membership model and recurring income models will try and gloss it over, but some of the lowest ticket memberships have the highest churn rate. Some of the most consistently growing memberships have a CEO at the helm who is hustling behind the scenes to generate new members every single month. They're basically launching every single month, trying to stack memberships on top of memberships so that the recurring income they do bring in is actually a viable income for them. And they're fighting a churn rate. So, you know, I don't mean that the membership model is the wrong model, but I think a lot of people try to use a membership model or a recurring income model to solve the wrong problem. They're trying to use the recurring income model to solve the problem that they don't know how to sustainably market and make sales in their business. But the recurring model doesn't solve that problem, because if you cannot sustain your marketing over time and you cannot make consistent sales over time, even the most amazing membership will plummet in its member numbers and the income that it's generating over time. And let's say that you have overcome that resistance to sales and marketing, and now you've really understood that you need to be able to do it in a far more sustainable way. Well, you might be like some of the people that I have seen who then go into this mode of preparing their launches all in advance. It's something that I do as well, and I definitely teach people how to do that. And so we're preparing all of the launch written content, all of the launch materials and assets well in advance. And so everything is taken care of. You just have to show up and be present with your audience, run your webinar or run your challenge, or make sure that you're responding to people's questions on socials and on email, and everything's scheduled in advance. But there is another phenomenon that I witness when people first step into this model of launching, and in particular with marketing that's batched in advance, is that I get a very consistent stream of people saying, well, I've done all of my launch prep. I'm in the middle of launch right now, and I've got all of this time. What else should I be doing? Surely there must be something else that I should be doing. And we see again this mindset of, surely I should be working harder. Maybe there is more hustle that needs to happen. If I've got all of this spaciousness now, surely I should fill it with some more strategic action, some more marketing strategy. And so we've got that swing back into hustle mode again. And then if any of these swings have happened for you into, I need to do it super easy, I need to try and be completely anti-hustle, all the way over to, no, now I need to hustle and I need to get the work done, you may have also experienced that you then either self-diagnose or have someone else diagnose that there's a mindset issue here. And one of the other things that I see people doing is deciding they've got a visibility block, or they've got a money block here. They've got a block in relation to mindset. Therefore, the best course of action is to stop everything until it's fixed, or stop doing the marketing and sales strategy, stop creating content until that mindset issue is resolved, or so that they can create space to work on that mindset issue. Okay, now hearing all of this, you might be a little bit confused. Tash, are you telling us that we should hustle more? Are you telling us we should be anti-hustle? What are you actually trying to say? Ultimately, I feel like we all have a sweet spot. We have a sweet spot where it feels like what we are doing has a great balance between ease and stretch. We have a sweet spot where when we are in a great space in terms of productivity, energy, mindset, action taking, we can be very strategic with how we harness that energy to look after our future selves and be epically productive without turning that into a burnout spiral. I believe we all have our own unique level where the workload feels like it's appropriate for the results that we are able to generate. And I also feel that being too caught up in what you want your business to look like in 5 years' time can sometimes lead to poor strategic decisions about your pathway to that outcome. I don't believe that we need to be working 60 hours a week in the early stages of business to get to the point where we are making consistent income. But in order to ensure that we're not having to do that, we need to be very smart with our strategic decisions. being told that someone just makes money overnight without having to work hard, without having to acknowledge what they've done previously, can result in feeling like there must be something you're doing wrong because you feel like you're working harder than other people, but your results are not there to show for it. I also believe that there is a tendency to label a lack of results as a mindset issue on its own. And I don't believe that it's ever just mindset or just strategy. Creating and growing an online business is a huge personal development journey. And if we are not actively curious about what's coming up for us, if we're not actively addressing those mindset blocks, that self-sabotage that might appear as we go through the process, it is going to feel like you're swimming upstream. I actually think one of the biggest challenges that we face is that mindset specialists will always tend to label challenges, issues, lack of results, anything where you feel like you're burning yourself out or you're working too hard, they will label it as a mindset issue, as a pure mindset issue. And strategists and marketing specialists and social media experts will label the problem as a strategy issue. The reality is, it's both. The reality is that we need to take a combination approach here, especially when it comes to productivity. Now, I define my productivity by the effort required to generate a certain level of results. It is not the effort required to create a certain level of output. It's based on results. So for me, productivity is the perfect space where we see that very tangible overlap between what it is that you're doing, your strategy, the energy and mindset that you bring to that work when you do it, right? Your mindset, and how you treat yourself when you are doing it. And for me, that's where the productivity piece is so powerful. So whilst there isn't a straightforward answer to the question, what is a realistic amount of hours to start, build, and sustain a business, I don't want you to feel like you can't find the answer for you, because I believe there absolutely is a perfect answer for every single individual. It depends on your ambition levels, your urgency, it depends on your capacity, it depends on your access to other resources. For some people, they have a lot of money when they start a business, and so the amount of time they need to invest can be reduced. For others, they don't have a lot of money and they are limited in time. Therefore, the timeline upon which they are building their business and the time frame it's going to take before they are at the point where they have got a sustainable and viable business model might be a little longer. So we've got to think about what the combination is for you. What do you have access to in terms of resources and assets? And we've also got to start taking action with the assets and resources we have to pay attention to and notice the ways where we might be making it a little harder for ourselves, convincing ourselves that there's 11 billion things that need to be done and every single one of them is urgent, but also looking for where we are actively avoiding taking strategic action and looking for those gaps where we don't know what the most strategic approach might be or the most effective approach might be with our unique combination of those resources and assets, as well as your skill set, your level of experience, the size of your existing network. All of those factors come into play. As you can imagine, this isn't something that you just make a decision about as a one-off and then you just rock and roll from there. This requires a practice-based approach. That is why when I sell the Heart Centre Business Planner, for example, it comes with an entire year of us working together on this, because I know that strategy and productivity don't just happen because you filled in a business planner at the start of the year. Strategy and productivity don't just happen because you have mapped out your content an entire year in advance. Instead, we apply a practice-based approach. In the planning system, we're investing a year in building CEO skills, building those practices of measuring your results. We do a monthly reporting and therefore being able to interpret what those results are telling you about where the gaps are in your strategy, where the gaps are in your client attraction process. In the Heart Centered Business Planning System, we have our quarterly planning process so that even if you happen to ignore the plan for a few weeks and go a little off-piste into a side quest, you've got the opportunity every quarter to come back to that central decision-making point to get back into strategic mode and focusing on what is going to most drive your results. Now, why am I talking about the planning system? Well, that happens to be related to the gift that I have for you today for day 6 of Tashmas. For the next 6 people to join the Heart Centered Business Planning System for 2026, the next 6 because it's day 6, you will also get enrollment in my Kickstart program absolutely free. Kickstart 2026 is a week-long event from the 12th to the 16th of January. And in that week, we are going to kickstart your productivity. We are going to kickstart the momentum of your year. Each day has a strategic workshop that is focused on another area of your business that we need to kickstart the momentum in. And there's co-working at the end of the sessions as well so that you can actually take the action, get it done, and get that momentum rolling. We kickstart your content. We kickstart your consistency. We kickstart your conversions and making sales early in the year. You can, of course, just enroll in Kickstart 2026 if that is what you're looking for. But if you are considering the Heart Centered Business Planner for 2026 and investing that year working on your CEO skills, working on how you work as the CEO of your business, how you manage yourself, how you stay focused on what's important, then jump on over to the show notes of today's episode and make sure that you're one of the next 6 people to join because you'll get Kickstart absolutely free. I'll pop the links and all the details on how to join Kickstart and how to join the Heart Centered Business Planner with the show notes of today's episode over at tashcorbin.com/491. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of the Heart Centered Business Podcast, and I'll see you tomorrow for the next day of Tashmas. Bye for now.